Many thanks, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to y'all. Appreciate y'all being here, and appreciate the TVA's proactive resolution of some of the problems that have been seen at Browns Ferry. We've been following these for a long time, since the 95003 was identified, this red finding, and there have been a lot of positive changes. There are some concerns, as y'all point out, and as the TVA knows and recognizes, and that's appreciated. Now, I passed out some information to y'all because I want to be up front with y'all, just like you're up front with the public. There are some concerns. There's been some peer review studies, INPO and WANO studies, but there's some other issues out there before I get into that, and there's questions here that I have. Just recently, of course, Unit 3 scrammed. Let's talk about Unit 3 just a moment, if we may. Unit 3 scrammed. There's been 2 scrams thus far this year. And of course, that was a problem. It was identified as the repetitive scrams in Unit 3. Now, once again, these scrams in 2012 related to power supply failures. I call them antiquated parts. I realize TVA and probably NRC doesn't like to think of them as antiquated parts, parts that have reached design expectancy and went beyond, and something happened, they failed. Okay. Just recently, on the May the 12th trip, in event number 50090, Unit 3, the core containment cooling system analog trip analog trip unit function test was in progress, and the reactor scrammed due to a failed power supply. And this thing about the failed power supplies keep coming up again and again. Of course, this is part of the analog system. So I have 2 questions related to that. Are we seeing these failed power supplies? Are these a result? Is this latest trip for Unit 3, the power supply, when the test was ongoing, was that a result of an old part being in that power supply, as occurred in 2012 with the small fire in the Unit 3 control room? Are these repetitive things occurring with the same pieces of equipment under the same, which should be identified, as Ms. Johnson pointed out, you know, and the TVA should be able to identify these parts that are reaching life expectancy. Is this power supply that caused a trip, was it an antiquated part or a part that was beyond life expectancy? That is a question.
Okay, I'll let Dave take that, and as he gets his thoughts together, it may be a simple yes or no answer. The plant trip, the plant shut down safely, operators performed well. There were no complications associated with the plant after it tripped. Public was safe, public was protected, environment was not affected. That's the end of that's important, because had that not been the case, there would have been additional reaction on the NRC's part, and we'd be having a different conversation, probably having a different conversation about that trip. So I think it's important to note that too, Gary.
It is, and I understand that. Okay. But it's still important to note that this business with the power supplies.
So we're going to answer that question.
Failing.
We're going to answer that question, but I just wanted to make sure that was understood.
It was pretty recent. It was May 12th. TVA, Browns Ferry, they formed a root cause team, and they don't have the results out yet. The initial feedback that we received wasn't directly related to a power supply failure. There was talk of maybe a ground, but there was 2 logic channels. They both got made up. One because they were testing it. The other one, they're not sure yet.
This is a quote now. The reactor scrammed due to a failed power supply. Now that's right out of the NRC's report. Okay, that's out of the revised event report.
We haven't seen the root cause yet.
Okay. So, you understand why I'm saying this is a concern. With 4 related defective power supplies in 2012, and then prior to that, then currently in the same unit, currently we're seeing what the NRC describes in the event report a failed power supply.
All right, Gary, first of all, that's a licensee submitted event report, so the NRC is not describing that, that's words put in. And that's within 4 hours of the scram happening, so there's a lot of, that's what they think happened at the time. They will be following up with a licensee event report, 5073 report, and we'll be reviewing that licensee event report and the root cause to determine if we have any regulatory actions we need to take. But right now, we just don't know what the
I got you.
failure was.
And I'm sure y'all do we'll look at that problem. But once again, I just didn't pick this out of the blue. That's jumped out at me because of the repetitive nature of these power supplies. And of course, we know there's analog parts, and of course, there's a digital control system. Now, is it possible that where you have these analog parts, is this conflicting with digital control systems? Is this, where you have voltage irregularities? That's a possibility. You have an old part, which actually, in the case of an older power supply and an out-of-date capacitor, there actually may be a spark that'll jump and cause that system, that particular power supply to fail. Is this, the power supplies, how, and this is an old question, how in depth are these old analog systems throughout the plant? I mean, is this going to keep reoccurring? How many, and this is another question that's been asked, how many old power supplies exist in Browns Ferry that could become a problem and cause a trip, or cause a series of trips, or cause a series of cascading problems? And as this gentleman asked the question about probable risk assessment, are you looking at this as risk managers? Is the TVA looking at this as risk managers? Is these repetitive failures, the fact that Unit 3 has a problem, y'all have identified the problem with scrams, are you evaluating a PRA properly concerning Unit 3 and the problematic parts that keeps surfacing?
Yeah, their PRA, they update their PRA based on equipment reliability. So as they see trend on power supplies failure or aging power supplies, they update, or they're required to update their PRA to reflect the increased probability of a failure, and that will roll into their risk numbers. I think it's really too soon to speculate on, are we having some interface between the analog and digital systems that could have caused this. I think that's still to be determined once they figure out what caused this. And in reality, I think it's not, well, I don't want to speak because we don't know the facts at this point on this current failure.
Right. But of course, now this is just not one failure. We're talking about within a 2-year, actually probably a 4-year failure, because the power supply and annunciator panels, that happened 4 times. Now we're talking about a power supply failure in an analog system in the core and containment cooling systems. And Dave, we talked about this over a year ago about concerns about part problems, these old analog parts being throughout the plant, that there could, there's a potential of a greater problem there. And there's the concern right there, and that's how the risk becomes involved.
Garry, I'd just like to point out there are hundreds of power supplies out there, so you are going to have failures. You're going to have failures, whether they're old or not. Now, age may cause more of them, and we would be evaluating that to see that's a problem, but it's a lot more complicated than...
I understand that. It's a massive machine. Believe me, I understand. Just like the human, see, I'm a medical background. The human body is a massive machine. That reactor is a massive machine. You got 3 of them. And all the reactor doctors are running around trying to figure out, keep it together, and make sure it operates safely. So you see, I, as John Q. Public, I keep reading these things about these power supplies, and I know a little bit about risk assessment. This gentleman knows a little bit about risk assessment, so we're concerned. we want you to do your job, and I think you are doing your job, because there is, and so is the TVA, because there's tremendous improvement out there over what was a couple of years ago. So thank you for that. But you are telling me then, there is going to be a risk assessment performed, and this problem with the repetitive failures of power supplies, y'all going to look into that and ensure that the TVA is doing their job there?
So I think just to summarize, I appreciate your characterization of repetitive power supplies that have caused, that may be a factor in the events that you described, and what may have been a factor in at least the most recent reactor trip. Should the facts confirm that yea verily, power supplies, analog relays are a factor in the graded performance of equipment, we will definitely follow up on that.
Thank you. Now, I was given a copy of the 2010 Browns Ferry IMPO report by concerned engineers at Browns Ferry. And I asked from the TVA if I could see the most recent 2013 WANO report. I was denied that request, and I find that problem, that's concerning, not a problem, not for me. Maybe a problem for the public. And the reason being is that, and I realize these reports are restricted, they're marked as restricted, but when an organization, whether it be a peer review organization or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or Joe Schmo engineer out there, just the name, says, hey, I found a problem here. I believe that the public has a right to know what that problem is. And whether it be a restriction, I can't buy these restrictions, okay? Because when public safety is compromised, there can be no restriction, particularly in nuclear power, in the operation, the handling of nuclear materials. The public has a right to know that that plant over there is operating safely, that Browns Ferry and any other nuclear plants operating safely. We employ y'all to ensure, as a regulator, that the TVA does their job. And the TVA is doing their job. Y'all are doing your job. But we've got some questions here, because when I seen that report, I became concerned. And that's the reason I gave y'all a copy of that. I summarized it. It is not a direct copy from the report, because heavens no, I wouldn't want to violate copyright restrictions, would I? So I summarized 25 findings in that IMPO report. And the reason I wanted to ask the TVA for their WANO report is because I also seen a summarized pamphlet that said everything was fixed. And of course, I've been coming to these things for a long time, and it's very obvious TVA is making improvements, y'all are inspecting, and there are some improvements being made. But some of the things I heard today and some of these recurring incidences reflect on the safety culture. Now, the TVA says the safety culture is being improved, but I got a question, is it? For instance, and I've got a lot of questions about this, the safety culture, and exactly what is occurring. Because the 95003 finding identified a valve failure in Unit 1. Okay? The IMPO report identified numerous valve failures in all 3 units at the plant. Now, have all those problems, what was identified in the notes, and I outlined this here, page 30 and 31 from the field notes concerning numerous valve problems at Browns Ferry, has that been corrected? Have the numerous valve problems, to include the one at which they received the 95003 finding on, can you give assurances to the public that all those valve problems identified in the IMPO report have been corrected at this time?
So Gary, thanks for your summary and for getting to a question. I think it's a bit difficult and impossible, actually, for us to answer that question here tonight. And your question is every valve identified in the 2010 IMPO report that needed to be fixed? Can we confirm for you that they've been repaired? We can't do that. it will be.
I did hear you said you know, you can't do that.
In fact, I wouldn't ask my people to do that right now. What I will do is commit to taking your question back and getting back to you. Let me just say, regarding the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, which was formed after the accident at 3 Mile Island, the focus on driving industry to excellence in operations, and has positively impacted the performance of the nuclear industry. Their reports are proprietary. NRC recognizes that as part of our regulations under 2.790 that we would not release that information. Having said that, NRC also maintains a memorandum of understanding with the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations that makes it very clear that if ever, whenever any issues affecting safety are identified in any INPO inspection, INPO evaluation rather, that information will be made available in a timely manner to the NRC. And also, the resident inspectors have an opportunity to review those reports. So does the branch chief reviewed the INPO report, and I even, because they're right up the street, their headquarters can look at reports as well. So that information is available to NRC. The reports are, and in particular, when a matter is discovered that affects safety, they would bring that to our attention as well. So I feel confident that matters that affect, that INPO has identified that have or could affect safety are promptly brought to our attention, and we respond to them. But we will take your question back and get back to you. Okay?
In just a little bit more detail, it's not just made available to us, we're required to review it. Dave is required to review it within how soon after it's issued?
A couple months, it usually takes about 6 months to come out, but
Yeah.
a couple months after that.
He's required to review it, and we document that review, and when he's reviewing, he's looking for any safety issues that are in that report that we need to deal with now, or any that we weren't aware of.
But again, in the INPO MOU, any matters that are identified that affect safety, they would bring that promptly to the NRC's attention. It wouldn't take 6 months to do
And
that.
that's happened? That has occurred?
Just to be clear, make sure I understand your question. With regard to the 2010 evaluation,
Or any
there were no
evaluation.
safety issues that were brought to the NRC by INPO in 2010.
No safety issues. Then I got to tell you, gentlemen, that's disturbing. Because I'm looking here and seeing the most problematic finding of this whole thing is safety culture and management failure. You know, and it goes across multiple scrams. Unidentified dry well leakage, increasing, continuous. Radiological safety, continuous problems. Equipment reliability, inhibited by supervisors and management. I'd say that's some pretty serious problems there now. And that not to be dealt with. And I'm taking some of what Mr. Paulson said, and the gentleman here from TVA, some of these issues are being addressed. That's appreciated. But, you know, there's this big question in my mind.
So what you've done, Gary, thank you for reminding me of the time frame of this report, because it was not long after that I believe TVA was receiving additional attention from the Institute of Nuclear Power Operation. But actually prior to that evaluation and report being issued, I signed out the red finding for Unit 1. And in the interactions that we had since then, equipment reliability and a number of the other issues were already under NRC scrutiny and therefore public scrutiny. So while you probably very accurately identified some safety significant issues in there, none were a surprise to us because we had already identified it, we NRC had identified it, and we had again started the increased engagement by virtue of the plant being in column 4 of the action matrix. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Let me pause you, Gary. It seems natural and also